Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Saint Reviews. I am your host, Tanner, and I am joined by...
Dante Natoli.
And...
Ted Stabile.
And we now are hosting the Sausage Party Show. If you couldn't tell, we're going to review Sausage Party. Now, the Sausage Party, I'm going to go through some of the cast. I did miss a few, so you guys can fill in the blanks if you'd like. Seth Rogen wrote and played Frank, and he wrote the entire film. Michael Cera was Barry. James Franco played the druggie on bath salts. Bill Hader was Firewater. Jonah Hill was Carl. Nick Kroll was the Douche. I should mention that this is going to have probably a PG-13 rating.
And spoilers.
And spoilers as well.
A lot of spoilers.
A lot of them. Paul Rudd played Darren. Nicole Oliver played Sally Bunn. And you guys can please start in to fill the blanks.
I do know Teresa Del Taco was played by Salma Hayek. Not sure about who played Brenda, but I know that she was a very pivotal character in the story. Ted, if you have any...
Who played Lavesh again? I have no clue.
I have no idea. Oh, yes, and Edward Norton played Sammy Bagel Jr.
Ah,
Right.
How could I forget?
There was a lot of overlap with some of the voices in the film. But there are a lot of big names in this film, which is, for me, kind of sad to see, unfortunately. But let's get into personal opinion on the film. So, Dante, why don't we start with you? Did you enjoy the film and why?
I did enjoy the film. I feel like a part of it was that because I kind of went into it thinking that it was just going to be a typical, like another Seth Rogen movie. It was going to be a stupid comedy. Just it kind of falls under this archetype. Seth Rogen movies in general kind of fall under this archetype of like, haha, dude, weed, and like just kind of just really bases a lot of the jokes off of that and just being a stoner. It's like a lot of the stuff kind of gets repetitive over time. I was pleasantly surprised going into this movie. I will say I thought it was the animation kind of looked like a little like it kind of like. Just like hurt to look at, I guess. It kind of felt like I was watching like an upgraded Hot Wheels movie, but like it was still. I gotta say, the content-wise, it was pretty funny. There were, a lot of like, if it's not your type of humor, there are a lot of like kind of like not so much racial jokes, but like like ethnic jokes, cultural jokes, which I think they did nail on the head pretty well. Other than that, other than the animation. I can't really have too many complaints about this movie. I was happy that they didn't really go too much into that whole thing that I was talking about where they were just making jokes about weed the entire time. There was mainly maybe about 2 or 3 out of the entire movie. And I was laughing hysterically within the first 5 minutes, so that's a good sign.
Yeah, it is a good sign. The opening number is wonderful to watch, I would agree. But now, Ed, what did you think of the film?
I went down on this. I did enjoy Meat Festival. I wasn't particularly disappointed with the animation. I do agree that some of it was rather simplistic. To my knowledge, half the animators weren't actually credited at the final scene, but the credits. But that's a whole nother story. I did enjoy it. It was a lot better than the impression I received from watching the trailers. Me and my mates, we just decided to see it right before we all went back to school because we figured we'd have one little enjoyable romp before we all went our separate ways for the end of the year. It was a pretty blue-pilled film, for lack of a better term. It was very enjoyable, but the themes that it was playing with, the motifs, like, there might not be a God, or the things you've been led to believe since birth might not wind up being true, might be a lot more horrid in reality. It's just the type of medium they use to do that with talking food and weed. It wasn't the best medium to really like have that message stick, but for it being the first 3D animated R-rated movie, I'm glad it holds that title because it deservedly earned that.
I would also agree that it earned it. So, my opinion on the film, I think it was enjoyable. It was a fun ride. It has some sort of like. It's elaborate, but at the same time, it's stupid fun in the same breath. It's wonderful to watch. It's a Seth Rogen film, getting into our next topic. As Dante mentioned before, there's a lot of weed jokes, there's a lot of sex jokes, there's some bad jokes that don't hit, there's political and social commentary in there. I thought they all worked rather well. There were some, I would say for every joke that did hit, there was one that didn't, but that's my personal opinion. If any of you would disagree or agree.
I'd say there was a solid piece of the humor pie in that movie where it was based on shock humor. For example, in the first 5 minutes, they hit you with that opening number, but then they interject at one verse to this very blatant symbolism of the Nazis, where they say juice instead of the original variation. There was also the scene where Carl, the little deformed hot dog, is traveling the real world, and he comes across that living used condom. And I remember hearing the audience audibly gasp during that scene, myself included, because that really, like, you didn't get that impression from the trailers, like I said before. So it threw a lot of left-wing punches at you throughout the course of the film.
It did. I would say when I did see the trailer for the very first time, it was really quite shocking. As you said, they went for the shock feature, really, and they tried to get the scene where the food are like basically reenacting the scene from Saving Private Ryan, which I thought was a wonderful alliteration to that film. It was rather weird to see food rather than people try to find like the cookie who lost his front face, basically. What about you, Dante? What about Seth Rogen just grasps you, or impresses you, or you think is just stupid and shouldn't be included?
Well, I mean, I will say I haven't. The last Seth Rogen movie I saw before this was This Is the End. So I was kind of worried that he was going to pull a lot of the faults that I found with This Is the End, was that a lot of the jokes hit well, but they would drag on for too long, and then that would kind of just drag it down and get to the point where it's just like, can you please move on? We get it. That's kind of what I was expecting. Obviously, didn't expect that. Not didn't expect it, but it didn't end up coming to light in the film. I really don't have anything else to add. Honestly, I mean, Ted put it pretty well with it's a lot of it is shock humor. I would go into the obvious and probably most prominent piece of shock humor in that movie, but we're going to get to that later, so I don't want to get too far.
Yeah, that is its own topic entirely, which is a spoiler. It's the last 5 minutes of the film. It is. So why don't we talk about some of the characters, some of your favorites, but specifically, I wanted to start with one character that stuck out for me, which was the Douche. His name is the Douche, and he is, for all intents and purposes, figuratively and literally, a douche. There's one scene in particular that is really was very uncomfortable for me to watch, and it goes into the shock humor of Seth Rogen, where he corners this like wounded juice box, and there is a sexual assault and murder of this. That was very weird. I would say if it's supposed to make you uncomfortable, yeah, it's supposed to make you like have that weird reaction where some people, like, whenever they're uncomfortable, they start laughing. I think it's what that is trying to do, and if that's their intent, then it hit home for me really well with that reaction that I'm supposed to give. But what about you, Ted? What did you think of the characters?
In relation to that one scene, I was a bit slow to the curve with that. So once I finally grasped like the illusion they were going with the life essence taking, as I'll refer to that, when it finally hit what they were alluding to, like my face just like sagged and dropped because I honestly couldn't believe it. It was definitely one of the biggest pieces of what the hell was going on. But I think it really captured the tone. It really captured the character, even the crushed up juice can dying on the floor. Like, just the atmosphere of it was really just flawless. I do think Douche would have to be my favorite character just because he wasn't in the trailer, so I was not expecting him at all. And like, he was definitely the most developed throughout the story when he gets so like roided up and angrier. Like,
he becomes a serial killer.
Yeah, exactly.
I should mention when he does kill the juice box and steal his life essence, that's supposed to be a reference to people on steroids juicing up, so like that. And he specifically said that after he was filled with the grape juice that he was juiced up. So that was
There's a lot of layers to that scene. This is what I'm talking about with Seth Rogen. Like, you can say he's stupid and doesn't know how to write, but he creates these allusions to real life and involves a lot of them in the same, like, 3 minutes on screen. It's just, I don't know what it is about it, but he's got something there. He's got something for sure. Why don't we move on to the last scene that we were talking about? It is the last 5 minutes, if you aren't familiar with the film. There is a food orgy what does that mean? Every character and the entire grocery store, for that matter, because it takes place in the grocery store for the most part, they all have sex on screen for 5 minutes. I would say,
Take it at face value.
yeah, I would say there's no social commentary in there, contrary to most of the film. I would also say it makes you uncomfortable. It really does to watch
Absolutely.
animated. It makes
Food.
it. You watch animated food have sex with each other. I would say if you walked out of that film 5 minutes before that happens, like 5 minutes before the end, you would be totally satisfied, missing the one joke in there, with the malformed, smushed hot dog bun and the other hot dog that had the piece missing from him, where he says, "I like how your face gives up halfway through it." That is the one joke from that is wonderful, but you can do without it.
It's like the broken piece of a life raft you're clinging onto in that sea of madness.
It's
To get a
true.
bit personal with that one scene in particular, once again, the audience, they had that sense of uncomfortableness, as you mentioned, where they just started laughing just to cope with it. My friend that was sitting to my right, loving the pieces, he actually shielded his eyes from the scene as it unfolded. And I yelled at him, I said, "No, you open your eyes and you witness this. You're going to suffer with the rest of us." But it truly set a precedent for what you can accomplish or get away with these types of movies. Because it's just a cartoon. What are you going to do?
It's really interesting because it's a cartoon. It takes animation, which is traditionally a children's thing, but it makes it adult. And that's what's, again, these layers of intricacy in Seth Rogen's films. What
another-
about you, Dante? What did you think of the last scene?
Well, I do want to say before I get into my opinions, that last scene is actually that's what almost caused the movie to be NC-17. That just that scene. It was teetering on R and NC-17. They obviously ended up going to R, but it was going to be that scene that was going to make this really the first ever adults only animated movie. So I mean, either way, they were kind of setting a record, but still, yeah, I'll agree that it was uncomfortable. I was laughing hysterically through it. I mean, I call it like a nervous reaction. Call it just a matter of me just thinking it was genuinely funny because it was kind of like it was out of nowhere. I wasn't expecting any of it, especially considering the relations with some of the characters. Like there's the whole feuding between Sammy Bagel Jr., who's supposed to be Jewish, and then the lavash bread that's supposed to be he's some form of a Middle Eastern.
Arabic.
And then they end up doing a bunch of stuff like despite all the feuding, and it kind of a part of it didn't really make sense to me because I felt like they were making a huge deal out of like actual like sexual preference in that movie, that like it was kind of clear that like the sausages were straight, the buns were straight, like there was one character, it was a Twinkie named Twink that was homosexual.
And so was the female taco was also...
the taco was like was a lesbian. But then it kind of just like I guess my gripe with that scene, I guess, is like looking at it from like an objective standpoint, is that it kind of just like discarded all of that and just kind of like it was like all bets were off at that point. I will say though, I think the movie would have been my opinions of it would be completely different had that scene not been in. Had it not been for the scene following, then I just feel like it would have just had a completely different era, because the scene following they ended up finding out that there were people that they were actually in the cartoon. They broke the fourth wall, and then Edward Norton's character ends up finding out that he is voiced by somebody who is Edward Norton, is how they pronounce it, and then he ends up getting annoyed at that. Seth Rogen ends up finding out that he's voiced by Seth Rogen. So then they kind of realize that now we have to go stop these people. They ended up meeting, which actually I didn't get to mention. My favorite character was probably the Gum.
the Stephen Hawking
Yeah, it was a quadriplegic piece of gum that was supposed to be a direct reference to Stephen Hawking, who is the most intelligent character in that movie and ended up orchestrating the plan to save all the food. Yes, and he ends up making a portal, and then they go into the the real world, and then the movie ends there. But yeah, I mean, I will say that was definitely one of the most memorable scenes in the movie,
Yeah,
to
I would
put it
say.
lightly.
Moving on to our final thoughts, we have to wrap this up. I'm going to say that Sausage Party, should you see it, I would say it's worth a watch. I wouldn't spend money to go see it again, for me anyways. I will say, last thing, there is a lot of meta humor in this, which is where a piece makes fun of itself. There are a lot of instances where it refers to stuff that happened in the movie before and they make fun of it. But I would say is worth a watch, but it's not worth to spend money on. Now, Ted, what about you? Final thoughts?
My final thoughts, I believe, well, first off, I agree, don't spend money on this at this point, but try to watch it legally. Go to like a drive-in theater or something. Bring food with you. It'll make the experience a lot more immersive. But my final thoughts can really just be stemmed down to 3 words. Dude.
Weed.
Lamau. You know, speaking of the weed, I do want to bring up just one final point. They kind of made this whole point that the food itself, like, you know, everything's living, even things that weren't the food. So, like, you had the douche, you had the used condom that Ted brought up earlier. They kind of didn't really have a line they didn't really draw a specific line of what they counted as living or not. Like, that was kind of, considering that, you know, a lot of the fruits and the vegetables were plants and those were living things. There was a scene where they were smoking weed. So, like, where did the weed fall in that? Because, I mean, it's technically a plant. I don't know, like, if they were... Like, I don't know if they were trying to reference, like, it was a corpse, if, like, they just didn't think about it. Like, I don't understand what their...
This isn't a movie you should think about too hard.
It really,
don't
isn't.
delve into it, but we have to wrap it up. So thank you so much for tuning in to St. Rose Fireside Chats, and the cast of St. Rose Fireside Chats, really, but St. Reviews, rather. And we will see you next time.
Bye. Good luck.